Keir Starmer and his Labour government have recommitted to spending £3 billion a year in Ukraine as they continue their war against Russia. The announcement was made as the Prime Minister attended a NATO summit and warned that the international community cannot waver with this conflict. But I'm asking tonight, do we actually need to carry on backing the Ukraine to the hilt? Or, big or, should funds be limited, and would they be better off maybe spent here? After all, we're not having a good time, are we? NHS is on its knees, cost of living crisis, education, crime, our prisons are overflowing. We need money spent on our services here. So that's a lot of money going to the Ukraine. Paul, I'm going to come to you first on this one. A lot of criticism from viewers about the amount of money we have pledged to hand over to the Ukraine, which both the Conservatives and Labour actually agreed on, didn't they? So have we still got two cheeks of the same backside as far as defence is concerned?
I think we have, and I've got no problem with helping Ukraine to beat back the invasion, Dawn. But I don't think this war is winnable. That's the problem. The war, I don't think, is any longer winnable for Ukraine. And what we're going to do, I think, by just the constant call, the demand for more and more war, I think it's just going to prolong the agony, prolong the war. It's going to drive it into an even deeper quagmire than it's in at the moment. And what does that mean? It means thousands more lost lives. It means thousands of young Ukrainian men.
They call it the meat grinder, don't they? Because that pretty much sums up.
That's what they call it. And young Russian men and communities and families being ripped apart. And look, Ukraine, I think, and I think most experts recognise this now, that Ukraine is burning through men and equipment probably faster than they can replace them. And because they're not going to win this war, they're not going to be, and I think that's sad, by the way, because the invasion is terrible, but they're not going to be in a position of strength when negotiations do eventually happen, as they probably will.
Do you think we should stop pouring so much money into it?
In principle, the invasion was such a violation. I think it's right for other countries to say, look, we're going to assist Ukraine in beating that invasion back. I would have liked to have seen a much greater effort, much sooner than now, to actually try to broker some peace, to the point where we shouldn't even now be talking.
A bit like Nigel Farage said. Nigel Farage said, we need to talk. We need to talk to Putin, engage Putin.
And you know, not just Nigel Farage, but even people like His Holiness the Pope has been saying, look, we need negotiations around this. And I'm surprised, actually, that here we are now, kind of 2 years into the current phase of the war, because the war didn't start in 2022.
It started in 2014, didn't it? Which we all ignored.
It's a myth for people to suggest that it started in 2022. It didn't. It goes back to 2014 and even arguably before that. But certainly for the last 2 years, there's been no effort by senior figures, the international community, to broker some sort of peace. You've got NATO coming out a couple of days ago and saying there will be an irreversible path to membership for Ukraine, which I have to say strikes me as the most irresponsible thing to say, and is real serious saber rattling. And I think it's just going to inflame the situation. So my simple position: the invasion was wrong. I hope it's defeated. We should have tried to embrace peace negotiations much sooner than now. And Ukraine is probably now not going to be in a position of strength when those negotiations do come.
Well, I mean, Daniel, we do seem to be literally funding a stalemate where thousands of people are losing their lives. Nothing seems to have been advanced any further. Only the other week we saw a children's hospital bombed. So it doesn't seem like any one side is winning. Thousands of people are dying. Is it time to stop this funding, sit down around the table and try and talk it out?
Can I just come to the first thing you said, which was about, foreign policy and the two parties? On Ukraine, as Paul has said, there is agreement between the two main parties. I think more than two main parties, I think the Liberal Democrats and so on, there is agreement. But I think it's already the case, we might not explore it today, that there are really worrying differences emerging on foreign policy more globally between the new Labour government and the outgoing Conservative government that have not yet been discussed, and they're very worrying and troubling. But when it comes to Ukraine, the fact is that Ukraine already has a peace deal with Russia. It already has a peace deal, and Russia's broken it. Russia is led by a man who sent people into the streets of Salisbury to murder people on British soil with no embarrassment, made a great joke of it as far as I could make afterwards. So what is this deal that you're going to do that you will trust lasts more than 5 minutes after you've signed it? That's the first question. The second question is, any deal you do, any negotiation you do at this stage in the war is going to result in a Russian victory. It might not be a total occupation of Ukraine, but it'll be a partial occupation of Ukraine at the very least, and dominance, complete dominance of Ukraine's foreign and largely domestic policies for decades going forward. So they'll be running Ukraine effectively. But it won't stop there. And this is the point I really want to make. Because if you talk to the countries that are bordering Ukraine and out on and Russia and Belarus out on the eastern side of the European Union, and you talk about the knock-on effect that's going to have on them, what you're doing is you're setting up a situation where we're not part of the European Union, I'm glad to say, but they're our nearest neighbours, the European Union. Our nearest neighbour, a really important power, is going to be dominated by a hostile, barbaric power next to it, potentially for decades to come.
Daniel, are you suggesting that Russia would invade other countries?
No, I'm not. I'm talking about, what I'm saying is, think back, because I'm so elderly. Remember the situation of Finland during the Cold War. Finland was a Western country, it was a free market country, anyone could go there, it was not behind the Iron Curtain. Everything that happened in Finland was approved by Russia before it happened. Their foreign policy was dictated by Russia. It was something called Finlandization. Their foreign policy was dictated by Russia. It was all cleared.
The days of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, that's what we're in a worse days than the Soviet Union now. Russia is more aggressive in many ways than the Soviet Union.
Russia has nothing
Russia
like
is more aggressive than the Soviet Union. I didn't interrupt you, Paul. Even their school textbooks, their history textbooks were cleared by the Russians before they were put into schools. And I'm talking about that sort of domination that you will get, that will directly affect the eastern part of the European Union and consequently ripple through elsewhere.
So what sort of countries are you implying that Poland and countries like that will be?
Countries like that, if you give in, Poland and countries like that, which cannot withstand Soviet threats, which are under threats already of a cyber character and so forth, we know that, but are also, right up against the border with these countries, they will suffer a huge setback in morale.
So tell me this, Daniel, why hasn't that happened to those countries since 1991 when the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union dissolved? Those countries have not been living in fear of Russian domination, or a Russian invasion. I think what is happening in Ukraine is a very unique set of circumstances where you've got disputes over Crimea, you've got disputes in the Donbass and the treatment of the ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine. And that led to an invasion which, as I say, was wrong. But I don't think there can be any doubt that there was a particular set of unique circumstances, including NATO bellicosity, let's be honest, which led to that. Now, if you're telling me that that was the first step for Putin in some master plan of a greater Russia, not necessarily sending troops in, but having some sort of soft domination over the Polands and the Baltic states, the Latvias, the Lithuanias, Estonias, etc., I don't think there's any evidence of that at all. Moscow, since 1991, Daniel, has conceded a huge amount of territory and has never looked at taking that territory back. Ukraine as the exception.
It's perfectly obvious, isn't it? Well, after 1991, we all believed, and a lot of Russians believed, that Russia was going to become a peaceable state that was part of the, if you like, the Western, we could all live together relatively peacefully. They'd have lots of free market stuff, they'd have McDonald's, they'd have all sorts of things that were visible to us, but they would change and they would develop in certain ways, and they'd become a market-oriented and peaceful sort of economy. And we believe that all the time. Is there a plan? Of course there's a plan. Before he's actually written the plan, before he's published the plan, before he invaded the recent invasion of Ukraine, there was that famous essay he wrote in which he explained why it was that the Ukraine and Belarus is part of this too. You do not imagine that Russia would allow democracy to take root in Belarus, because that's already part of this. That this was a plan he had for reuniting what he regards as core Russian territory. And that includes the Ukraine and Belarus. And he wrote this one and published it. Ben Wallace wrote.
Poland and the Baltic states.
Ben Wallace wrote. Well, all of this is exactly what Hitler said over the Sudetenland.
Oh, come on, come on.
All of this is exactly what he said.
We're into Godwin's law now, where we're going back to Hitler.
It's just one adjustment. It's what they would always say. We just need to make this one adjustment. We're worried about German speakers in Czechoslovakia. We just need to sort them out. Come over, Mr. Chamberlain. Sign the piece of paper. Sign the piece of paper.
Daniel,
we'll agree it. We'll transfer
every time
the
there's a territorial
and
dispute.
then, of course,
one at a time.
And it's not every time.
Every time there's a territorial dispute, people will always depict that particular dictator, whoever it is at the time, whether it was Nasser back in the 50s or whatever, as the next Hitler.
The words you are literally
using
are the same words that were used to justify Hitler's stance. The parallels are so close here,
I think
Paul. You are literally using those words.
When you consider the power and the might of the German military in the 1930s and the manner in which they were able to, and
the German military
clearly intended to march through much of Europe, I think the idea that we can extrapolate from a particular dispute in Ukraine that Putin wants to do something similar to Hitler in terms of expansionism, I think is entirely fantastic.
Can I just get one thing clear here, Daniel?
Actually, as it happens, when the German army did eventually invade the rest of Czechoslovakia, it largely broke down
Daniel, we're running out of time, unfortunately. Just one thing clear. You genuinely think that unless we carry on funding and the rest of NATO carry on funding the Ukraine, that Putin is in danger of doing a Hitler and he won't stop until we stop him?
Absolutely, and it will be.
Which countries would he invade?
Process. I didn't say. I was very explicit in saying how I thought Russia's influence would be exercised over Eastern Europe and rippling through to the rest of the European Union. It would not be the first time French troops have paraded through Paris.
If Canada were to enter into a military alliance with Russia and China, what do you think the reaction of the White House would be?
I think they'd be a little unhappy about it.
I have to go there. I'm being a little unhappy. Yeah. Fascinating debate. Thank you both very much.